So here with me is Mike Zashka. Besides being a father of 5, so we have 3 kids and 2 dogs, he is business unit lead cloud consulting at P6336. However you want to call it in Germany or German or English. And he will talk about modern JavaScript and SAP UI5. So please welcome with me, Mike Zashka.
Yes, thank you for this kind introduction, and it's actually P36. All right. So yes, I'm really excited to be here today and to talk to you about modern JavaScript and UI5. And before I actually start, I want to, because we are a diverse group of people, we're coming from different countries, religions, genders, ethnics, whatever. I'm actually going to use memes in my talk, right? And I'm not sure if everyone is familiar with memes, so I just want to mention that they have the purpose of having kind of the same meme attached with different comments on them in a humorous way, and that's what they're meant to be. So they should not be considered like they do some harm or they're never meant to do any harm. So please, let's follow this, have fun with those memes, you and me, and in case you cannot laugh about this, then either I failed in making them funny or you should adjust your humor in this way. All right, so another thing that I just want to talk about, you heard this a lot, there's TypeScript everywhere, and I'm a huge fan of TypeScript. But I explicitly choose not to talk about TypeScript today. For reasons, because I think that stuff I want to discuss, you don't need TypeScript for, right? TypeScript adds lots of stuff. So basically everything I'm going to talk about today is available in TypeScript, right? And there's even more stuff like real type safetiness, like advanced object-oriented patterns, easier access to future JavaScript functionality that's still not available in JavaScript, and so much more. But again, I just want to focus on JavaScript and basically talk about that you don't need to wait for TypeScript to be here to actually do some modern stuff. Okay, so in this talk, TypeScript will actually no more present. All right, so with that being said, I'm starting with another meme. And that's basically at the core idea of my talk. So when you look at the spectrum of people who are coding UI5, you have actually a wide range, right? On the one side of things, you have very, very experienced JavaScript developers, right? They are maybe not only doing UI5, they are only on the backend side, they're doing CUP development, or even other frameworks like React, Svelte, or whatsoever, right? And they tend to, they're into the JavaScript ecosystem, and they know all the various developments that are going on there. But on the other side of things, you may have people that basically learned JavaScript alongside UI5 because they're coming from an ABAP background, or they started developing because they want to build a UI5 app. And there's a huge gap, and that is growing every year. So it's based on for historical reasons. So when we look at the history of things, so basically, back in 1995, there was the introduction of JavaScript in those browsers, back in those old days. And because there should be some standardization across different browsers, there was ECMAScript introduced, which basically defines the feature set of JavaScript, right? So whenever I use ECMAScript, I can translate this to the feature set of JavaScript. So over the years, there was different versions of ECMAScript released, resulting in 2009, where there was ECMAScript 5. And that's basically the foundation that UI5 has been built on, right? So UI5 has been released around 2013. The development started maybe a lot earlier, but that was the core foundation of things for UI5. But after that, there were additional releases of ECMAScript. So in 2015, we had a very big release with ECMAScript 6. And following that, every year, another version of ECMAScript up until 2022, and they're most obviously will be one for 2023 as well. The key issue is that when you look at the core functionality of SAPUI5 and the core documentation, like if you open the otherwise very, very, very good documentation where you find lots of examples and tutorials and the API documentation, you will actually, the scope of the functionality of JavaScript is actually bound to like ES5 and some things of ES6, like promises. And so we have a gap of like 8 years now where we are doing stuff in JavaScript in a way that maybe can be done differently, or I would say that should be done differently. So with that 8-year gap, we basically have two options to going forward, right? So we can either say, well, we learn those new modern things that have been introduced to JavaScript, or we basically learn to use those things in JavaScript, because I think there is no other way, right? And the choice is not that complex. To prove my point, I actually I have 4 like reasons why you should do this. Okay, first one, and that's basically the most important one. That's a coding that's been copied over from the official documentation for a menu item, right? So it basically contains a traditional controller with an on-press function callback, and well, basically we launch we load a fragment which is using promises. That's very good. And then, we just open the menu and show it to the user, right? So that's classic UI5 that you may already know. But there are, as I said, several things that have been introduced that could make our lives easier. So for example, ECMAScript 6 introduced real JavaScript modules. So in UI5 we have our own stuff, but they are like a standard now available in JavaScript. The same applies to classes. We have let_const, which can be used or should be used for variables. We have something like nullish coalescing assignments, which can be used to actually could potentially get rid of this if statement. We have arrow functions. We have real private fields. So that's a lot of stuff going on in the JavaScript universe that we're not seeing in this coding. And when I apply all those principles, then I potentially can end up with something like this, which, by the way, I could use the exact same coding in UI5, and it will work. So again, compare this to something like this, and I think you can see a difference, right? So that's less code, it's less complex because I don't have these nesting levels. It's far easier to read. So my number one thing for the most important reason to actually use modern JavaScript is you have fewer lines of code, you have less complexity, you have better readability, you have less maintenance effort, you have better extensibility, less bugs, less costs, more fun. So the number one reason is actually like 8 reasons, right? Why you should adopt those modern principles. Second reason, you've heard this in the keynote as well, and there was a blog post mentioning this in the sub-community, beginning with version 1.1.1.6. Basically, there's a shift, and the UI5 core team will start adopt things from ECMAScript 2022. So if you're not familiar with this, you potentially need to come up to understand what's going on there. Number 3, so in the past, I mean, it was there myself, like we had Internet Explorer and stuff, old browsers. I was not sure if I can use a certain functionality or if it would break my browser, right? But we're in 2023 now. So there is no Internet Explorer anymore. And if I look at the browsers, you can actually see that most of them, like 99, the top 3, like Chrome, Edge, and Opera, they support like 99% of the functionality of ES22. Yeah, and Firefox and Safari are a bit behind, but even still, then I have like very high numbers. But maybe you can say, okay, but yeah, we cannot use the latest browsers. because we have corporate stuff going on, and I can only use Edge in version like, I don't know. But then you're also covered, right? So again, this has been mentioned in the keynote, and I think there should be no project in UI5 without the UI5 tooling, and especially without UI5 tooling transpile. Because this basically enables you to have like two types of JavaScript that you're coding, right? You have on the one hand side, you have like dev time JavaScript. So I can use the latest features I want to use, and UI5 transpile will basically transpile this to the code that will be executed in the browser. So I can do very fancy stuff, and the stuff that has been transported to the browser, it may be compatible with like ES5. And that's so easy to integrate now with the tooling UI5, using the UI5 tooling version 3, because you just have to insert this inside your package JSON and apply some specific configuration. And even you can omit this target browser thing. I just want to leave it here because you have defaults and you have options to override things, and then they will also work for you. So that's super cool. Number 4, because it simply will make you more attractive, right, for other projects. And I mean, I said this before, right? We have lots of stuff to do in the SAP world, but there's a world outside of SAP. Yeah, and I mean, I have talked to some JavaScript devs that are doing other stuff, and when they see our UI5 code, they were like, whoa, that looks like the 90s code, and want their JavaScript back. So it's also important for you to actually get up to date and enhance your skill set to be ready for future projects. All right. So that's like the 4 reasons why I think it's really important. And one can potentially say, okay, I have my JavaScript stuff here. We had this in the keynote as well, so there always needs to be some AI talk these days. But I actually wanted to look at this. How can AI support us here? So let's just quickly jump over to a small ChatGPT application, and I'm not using the original ChatGPT. I'm using my own version of it, because I basically rebuilt ChatGPT with UI5 and CAP as sub-technologies. And just ask it to, what does it know about UI5 and what in JavaScript? So let's just go over there, and because I like this very much, I'm going to choose a pirate personality. Okay, so I'm going to ask it, show me some UI5 controller. Right. So I'm just letting ChatGPT talk to me and show me what it means, like how does UI5 look, right? And that's what it comes up with. That's what it comes up with, right? So we have that stuff that we already know, right? But it's missing the important parts, like, okay, I don't have a var definition. I don't have any variables in here. That's a bad example. But it will basically not show any signs of modern JavaScript. And that's for a reason, because I mean, it's based on the data that's been fed with, and that stuff is like the old JavaScript that we coded back in those days, right? And I can ask him, like, can you make this use ES2022 syntax? Well, because the coding is not that complex, that's a bad example. Again, he will try to do stuff, right? But he will not use real classes, for example. He would still use SAPUI5 define, or because he chose a bad example, maybe let's quickly go over and grab the code that we had in our example. Can you make this look, or can you apply ES22? Okay, let's see what it does. so this will kind of work, right? So it basically tells me I can use the import statement. I still, when I look at this, I still see there's this if statement that I could get rid of and use this knowledge coalescing stuff. But yeah, well, it's a good jump start, right? But with that being said, I still need to know, right? I cannot, and that was a question in the former presentation, is there a way to actually like move stuff from my old JavaScript to TypeScript, for example? And I think there's no easy and automated way. Because we can not simply, or we should not simply translate the old stuff to the new. Because there are so many cool things in JavaScript nowadays that you could potentially use that there is some manual effort required and it should be applied. So coming back to my presentation and how AI should potentially be used, I would say you should use it. I'm using Copilot and ChatGPT on a daily basis because they really, really help me to do things. But that doesn't free me from knowing things, right? So I need to know all those fancy patterns that are available in JavaScript, and then it can be really helpful. Okay, so what is in modern JavaScript, right? And sadly, I don't have enough time. I probably would take me like a day or potentially a week to talk all those stuff that is there. But I just want to highlight certain things and get you started and, yeah, a sense of this. So that's basically a reduced feature matrix of all the stuff that has been added throughout the ECMAScript versions. And you have really simple things like the addition of one function added to an array, for example. But there are also really, really fundamental things inside that really change the way that you work with your applications, right? So for example, promises. So I'm not talking about promises because if I want to open this chapter, then I could talk for like hours. But they are super, super powerful, and yeah, you should get to know them because they make you, yeah, you can build applications in a totally different way. So I will just focus on some of them, right? Just quickly go through them and show you what is inside on those features. And one thing that is, I also want to mention, that's the Hungarian notation, right? Hungarian notation basically refers to adding the typings inside of your variable name. It's still a recommendation to actually use those, but I was kind of never been a big fan of this, and to support my claim, I actually searched and found some other guys that also, yeah, the same meaning. So there's a book called Clean UI5, which is also done by very good SAP people, and they also state that if you are applying those modern principles, even not using TypeScript, but just pure JavaScript, you potentially can just omit them, right? And there's a blog post from like 2 years ago from Pascal Vazem who basically says the same. So for me, it's basically like this, and I actually don't use them anymore. I mean, again, they're like part of the official API, or the official, like, you should do it this way, but I'm get rid of this. So in any coding example that I have on my slides, you won't find them. Okay, so let's start with stuff that, what is inside of those newer ECMAScript versions? Okay, let's start very simple. Like, there's additional ways to declare variables, right? So in the past, I just had var, and now I have two other options. Like, I can define variables with let, which declares a reassignable blocked scope variable, and I can use const to define a not reassignable blocked scope variable, right? So I can just put it here, like I can define my object, I can modify the object as well, and yeah, then I can reassign it because I can reassign. I can basically do the same, but reassigning the const variable would produce an error, right? So that's nothing complex. But I highly encourage you to use let and const instead of var for an obvious reason, because they are block scope, right? And you could say, well, I have var, I don't want to do this. But there's some thing, right? This simple code will basically produce 5, because var is not block scope. And it can have side effects on your application. And I still remember In the past, I had searched a couple of hours for an issue I could not explain myself that was basically related to this, right? So if you have like the option to use let and const, always use them. Another small but also very interesting topic is like template literals, right? So in the past, you had like, if I want to define a string, I use single or double quotes, and I'm fine with this. So if I want to concatenate certain things, I have to use the plus sign, right? And there was no real support for multi-line strings, so I had to always use plus, plus, plus for every new line. ES6 basically introduced those backticks, which are basically template literals. And with this, I can define like templates, strings as templates, right? And they have like placeholders. So dollar curly brackets basically define a placeholder, and it can just insert the stuff that I want to concatenate into my string through the placeholder. And also a nice feature, I can have really multi-line strings with this, right? So that's nothing big, but it's nice to have it around. One thing that is pretty cool about this, and I stumbled across this through this taken over from the SAPUI5 team. So I'm also doing some back-end stuff, and I saw this fancy like syntax to actually apply select statements. And that is just valid JavaScript. And I saw this and I thought to myself, wait, how can I just call something and then add a template string to this? But basically, there's something called tag templates or tag functions, right? I can write a function that can take a template literal as an argument and basically all placeholders as additional arguments and do stuff with it. And I can omit like the brackets. And so that's really some clever way to do this. But it basically shows you that you can really use those features and build something, really fancy with this. One superpower of modern JavaScript is basically arrow functions. And they are basically really a superpower because they are a very compact alternative to having like the function to define functions. Right, so that's the old way. I define my func just with function and then a function body. And basically those three opportunities are arrow function ways to define stuff. Right? I could live with the brackets if I need them, but also I could get rid of them. And I can completely get rid of every bracket if I have just a one-liner and want to apply certain things. So they basically all do the same, but this is super nice to read and super, not much code to write. Let's put it this way. Okay, but they're also, a superpower when combined with arrays, right? And there's a lot of cool array functions in JavaScript these days, right? So back in the days we had like load dash and stuff that would be required if we want to do fancy things. This is not needed anymore because we have really cool stuff. So, for example, we could have this like developers here, right? And that's pure fictional data because actually I'm turning 42 today. I'm not sure about the rest, so yeah. But I want to put some emphasis on this. That's just arrow functions, right? I can have like a sorting function by name, and a filter function by older than, and a mapping function by person name, and have like 3 lines of code, and I could just stretch this like 4 lines of code to do some super complex array processing. And that is like, wow, super cool. So you should really, really use arrow functions. That's another big topic is in the past, and this is still around, we saw this in the example that I copied over from documentation, you have things like, in my callbacks, I need to bind this context if I'm defining it with a function. Right? I could either do it with the bind, or I can store this context, this context in that or self, and reuse it in the callback itself. With arrow functions, I don't need to do any of this, because arrow functions do not have a disk scope. So that's super convenient as well. Less code. All right, there's real JavaScript modules and classes in UI5 now. right? And that's actually a big thing, because well, that's also for others this thing, because they tend to use, like, I can use my import statements and I can use my class statements, but when I do the UI5 way of doing this, they are like, whoa, what's this? I need to understand this first. Okay, sadly, for historic reasons, I mean, UI5 did this by purpose, because there was no, like, module system and class system around, so they need to have to come up with their own, right? And therefore, it's not really applicable to actually exchange this and use this in the core functionality of UI5. So there's a statement in the UI5 tooling that it's not supported, right? Which kind of get me angry, because I want to use this, but actually I can, right? There is this UI5 tooling transpile, and I talked about having like 2 versions of your code, right? The dev time version and the runtime version. And with the UI5 tooling transpile, I could easily add this simple configuration, which is transform modules to UI5, and then I can use it. So it's as easy as this. This has been a little bit more complicated in the past. I need to gather some Babel config, etc. But with UI5 tooling 3, this is super easy to use. And I can also mix this with my existing applications, right? So I can have applications where I have like the SAPUI5-defined stuff, and next to have real classes, and use this in my code. So that's super, super convenient. And yeah, that's basically an example class. So what is supported and what not? So we have like this import statements. I can import stuff from somewhere else. I have like object-oriented pattern, like inheritance. I can inherit, the main controller inherits from the base controller. I can have public instance fields, static fields, private fields. Sadly, as of now, basically they are real private fields now, right? So we are using it in a way like we put this underscore in front, and they basically are still available from the outside, but they are marked as private. ECMAScript 2022 basically introduced real private field with a hashtag, so they are not accessible from the outside. But currently they are not usable by the transpiler, because it will basically, even with the transpiler, because it will basically transform your class into this SAPUI5-defined syntax, and then you will get an error because there's still this private around and it's not valid there. Yeah, but maybe, I don't know, maybe the transpiler will be enhanced to actually have a solution for this as well, and then you could use this also. Yeah, basically on the inner sides, and that's also something that was mentioned in the keynote, that's also based on the Babel plugin transform modules to UI5, right? And you can find some additional information on how you define the metadata, for example. So if you developing controls, you have your metadata stuff. That's also ways to define this in proper classes, right? And that's all documented here. There's optional chaining, which I totally like. So imagine we have a nested structure like this, like a deeply nested structure. I have like an outer, inner, and inside I have some key or some method, and I want to access this property. And I'm not sure if it's there or not. So in the past, we had have to do something like this, right? ES5. I have to check if this object is available, and if the outer value is available, and if the inner value is available. So resulting in a, not so nice readable and writable code. This also applies to functions. With optional chaining in ES15, introduced in ES15, I can have this like question mark dot. And if I put this in my chaining, basically if the object is not there, it will not produce an error, but just return undefined, right? So I can use this. So, and if this is not there, then key will just be undefined. And I can potentially add another or a default value or so. But it will not break. The same applies to methods. And I don't have it on the slides, but also for arrays and stuff like this, or objects. So it's super, super powerful. Another thing that I totally like is destructuring. So imagine we have an object called my object, and I want to grab certain properties from this. right? I can do so by stating like my object dot name, and it reads it from there. But there's a very clever way to do. You can do this with like ES6 upwards. So I can put curly brackets after my variable declaration, and which will basically assign the property of that object into the variable name, which is super nice. I can do this once. I can actually do this multiple times, right? I can access multiple values. I can actually play around with this and can say, okay, I want to rename the variable that I'm storing this to like my name to have, yeah, a little bit more control. And there's also something like, I want to just grab the name and store the rest of the properties inside of a, yeah, another array, another object I call rest. So I have something like, yeah, the name and then all the other properties in an object. So that's very like simple in terms of what I can do with it, but it enables really, really powerful things. So for example, when you build complex or more complex functions, I tend to like they have 3, 4, 5 arguments. I don't want to have like, because I can remember all the order of things. I tend to have like named properties, right? So I can give an object into the argument and then do something with it, right? And if I use this with deconstruction or destructuring, I can have pretty powerful way to like have those named parameters, have destructuring into variables that I can reuse in my code, and also can provide default values. So that's super convenient, super powerful to have like complex functions reduced, and I can just call my draw chart, for example, like this, and put in the stuff that I know from the outside and have the inner defaults work as well. So that's super cool. And by the way, I think ECMAScript 5, so the version that we are also always referring to, it hasn't like default values for parameters at all. So yeah, that's a benefit as well. I could have like so much more to tell you, but there's time and I cannot really look into things. So just, or fully explain things. So just 2 additional things that I really, really like and that you have seen in the example that I presented earlier. So there's nullish or logical or coalescing assignment. So we have seen this if statement that we tend to use a lot, like if I load a fragment and I'm going to storing the fragment in an instance variable, I'm going to check if the instance variable is filled and then I can omit the loading. There's a much easier way to do this now, right? So I have this question mark equal sign or pipe equal sign, and this will basically check if the object is either falsy or nullish, right? So question marks will refer to nullish, and this will refer to falsy. And only execute the statement after the equal sign in case the variable is not filled, right? So I can totally omit the if statement, which makes it much nicer to read. And one other thing, which is on the slide, introduced with, I don't know, ECMAScript 2021, I can have like 1,000 separators. That's valid JavaScript. Okay, that's some, yeah, I mentioned this. Promises are huge, and they enable you to do pretty cool stuff. And we have promises around, so we are basically using them when we load fragments, right? We have fragment load, which returns a promise, so we can have the option to actually work with promises. Also, the OData-v4 model, it's basically working with promises. But that's not the only use case. Again, I've written, you have seen the chatbot. I actually blogged about this in the sub-community, and I took my time to actually really go into the details. So I blogged about TypeScript and also using the usage of promises for stuff like dialogues to not spoil your controller code. So maybe you can look this up. But that's a more advanced example, right? So you can also have, so remember, so imagine we have a iteration that we want to iterate over something, right? And in this scenario, I have a paginate API in the background. So I need to only can grab like 20 items, and then I need to make another request to load another 20 items. And you will potentially find stuff that it's written like function star. And there's a keyword like yield that has been introduced with 2018. And I can actually write my own iterators, or async iterators. So what this basically does, it looks a bit like magic, but it basically grabs the API and do the calls, and every time it gets something, it calls yield, right? And whenever it yields something, basically I can access this in my iteration function. So from the outside, it's just I'm iterating over all the stuff that the method finds, and I'm totally unaware from the outside what's going on inside, right? And here I do some magic, like again, I'm iterating over paginated stuff, but that's totally transparent. So that's, again, like super cool stuff I can do with it. And that's basically combining many of the things that are around with newer or with modern JavaScript. So yeah, how to learn more? That's just the peak of the iceberg, right? And there are tons of good articles out there. So if you just start searching for ECMAScript specific version, you will get nice blog posts explaining like what are the new features, how they can be used, and that's super cool. There's a very good site that I want to explicitly mention. That's the Modern JavaScript tutorial, which basically has a list, and it's really good. Again, you should use ChatGPT, Copilot, and other AI technology. So if you ask ChatGPT about a certain functionality, it will have a really good explanation for this. There are also online courses, right? They're not specific to UI5, but they are very good at explaining the basics of JavaScript. And there are also some books around. So there's this Clean UI5 book, which is pretty good. It's pretty up to date. It's from like 2020. Excuse me. And yeah, it contains also very good stuff on modern JavaScript. And I haven't read the latter one, like the UI5 framework stuff from Marius and Volker. I'm not sure if it will cover, but I would think it would actually mention modern stuff as well. Okay. Yes, so I have two closing wishes. The first one is that I hope that you kind of get inspired, because I wanted to show you, look, you don't have to wait for TypeScript to come around. Even with JavaScript, you can and you should apply modern JavaScript principles to your applications. So I hope you choose, if you're not already on that train or on that track, you should actually start doing this. And my wish number two, and this will basically address the core team, please update the documentation with this, right? So you mentioned it, like you want to introduce and use latest ECMAScript versions, and that's really important. That's really important, because again, so when we have young developers joining our team, and I'm going to send them over to the otherwise very good documentation, because we have all the samples, all the stuff there. I need to tell them, please don't look closely at the JavaScript, because that's like not so modern anymore. All right, so with that, I am actually done with my talk.
Thank you, Mike Sashka from P36.
Very good.
Have you ever thrown a microphone?
Not thrown, but maybe I can I kick it?
Then
No.
it's your first time.
I played
Happy
soccer.
birthday.
Oh, thanks. Thank you.
So, what are your questions? What are you interested in?
Thanks. Okay. Thank you, Mike.
I was wrong about your age, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's okay. It's okay. Thank you. Thank you for the compliment, and thank you for the presentation. It was really nice, and I think very important for everyone. I do have one question where I would like your opinion about it, and it's the underscore for private variables in a class. I think in JavaScript it still makes sense, but would it still make sense when you have TypeScript where you define it really as a private property?
So I didn't get the last part.
So for private properties in a class, now you used underscore. But when you're using TypeScript, you already use the private syntax. Would it then make sense to use the underscore in front of it?
I actually most of the time only use TypeScript these days, and I don't use underscores because I mean if you're at design time and you define things as private, you don't have access to them as well, right?
Okay, thank you. That's what I wanted to hear.
Okay.
I would like to throw to someone.
Now it's yours. Who's next?
Okay, then maybe I can. Oh, okay, there's one.
Which one first?
So, thanks for the talk. I'm not from SAPUI5 core team, so I'm not triggered in any way. But don't you think that a lot of stuff you showed has real trade-offs regarding credibility, especially if you mentioned that we have a lot of developers who are, let's say, basically ABAP developers, because I know a lot of stuff from dealing with Rust and so on, but stuff like destructuring is maybe for a lot of people just like Chinese, and they will not understand code base if you later with them with newer, let's say, JavaScript features. And there are also contrary movements, let's say, in programming languages like with Go, where they say a lot of this stuff is actually not really needed to write code, and it has real trade-offs. And what's your opinion on that?
So I'm not sure if I fully get your question, but you just meant that some aspect of this are there, but you should not use it because
No, it's just for, I don't know, I mean, technically I'm on you, and it is a shame that our examples are still littered with var, for example. There is no real need to use it. But for a lot of newer stuff like destructuring, it's useful, but it also makes code really, let's say, harder to read, especially for people who are not dealing with JavaScript on a daily basis. They are not maybe mainly UI5 developers, but look sometimes into the code base and deal mainly with ABAP, for example. So stuff like that. And I don't know, I mean, I like arrow functions, but on the other side, I often see that they are harder to read, and code bases which are littered with filter map reduce are really harder to debug, at least for me.
Yes, I would kind of agree with this. I can understand your concern about this, but on the other hand, I mean, it's there, right? And and it's also used in many other places than UI5 already. So yeah, I mean, you're using functions as well because you know they exist, and it's kind of a task that's up to you, like to stay up to date with the latest stuff. Again, so I know this stuff because I'm using this on a daily basis, but I had my hard time. I had also my hard time getting used to TypeScript, for example, right? And you working full-time with no types and then having types around, it's like, whoa, I'm totally blocked and I cannot continue. But you should actually look into this and you should learn this. And once you get used to them, it's like, I don't write functions anymore. I only write arrow functions because they're so much nicer to read and to write. So yeah, I see the issue here. That's basically the motivation for me to stand here, because I see there's a huge gap between the people that are doing fancy stuff and all the cool stuff, and the people from the on-premise ABAP world that like, I don't know what's going on here, right? Okay, so maybe I can, as a last question, who is using those modern JavaScript principles as of today? Okay, so that's quite a lot, but also like 40% or so like not. So that's pretty interesting.
I think we had one more question here, or next to you.
Yeah, thanks a lot for the talk. It was really interesting. And I'm coming from the other side, like I'm a JavaScript developer, and now I'm trying to get my foot into this UI5 thingy. And first looking at the documents, I was also a bit surprised, let's say like this, about the code style, like all the old JavaScript code. And as you mentioned in your slides, is it worked on like from the core team on the documentation? Is it going to be changed, or I don't know, where's the roadmap there?
Actually, since I'm not from the core team, I cannot comment on this. But I mean, there are solid reasons, like there's backwards compatibility reasons and stuff like this. So it's not they just don't want to do this. They had a reason for this. But actually, they mentioned like in the keynote. I don't know if you have been part of the keynote, that there's this version 2 coming up. I've actually talked to Peter on this, and I think they're working on things. And even with TypeScript around, I think if they are going to start doing everything new, I don't know, they potentially might also do this for TypeScript. But yeah, I hope they will come up with this soon. Yes.
Okay, thanks a lot. Oh, yeah, that's easier.
Hello. Yeah, I'm a new developer using UI5 by SAP, but I have like background in other different languages, C#, Java, and multiple things. The question is, I was scared by what you've shown.
You scared?
Yeah, I didn't. Because somebody read a book in a Udemy training for me. I understood what you read, what you showed us. The problem is it's scary for new developers. It's not like understandable at all. If I am a Java developer and I see like what you've showed us, yeah, it shortens and makes more possibility to make a better implementation of a code or maybe advanced concepts. But as a starter, it's not helping for me, especially if the documentation not yet adapted, like the question there. How and what you recommend us as new joiners, let's say?
I explicitly, especially the latter examples, I choose them because I thought maybe there are some experienced people around, and I just don't want. I want to have something like fancy to impress them, also, or to keep them in the room. So that's stuff that is really complex, right? Most of the stuff, so using let and const and getting used to use error functions, that's simple stuff, right? And you should use it. And I mean, even if you're coming from other programming languages, they evolve too, right? Java evolves and introduces new concepts. And I think the problem for UI5 in that area is that there's a huge gap, right? So from like 2015 to that's like 8 years of features that need to hold up.
Now that's my challenge, because my team is using AS5 version of code, and now when I learn from somebody else, they are using 22 version, and I need to roll back the whole knowledge and find the old documentations, or maybe the ones provided by the UI5 documentation. That's very challenging for us. Even to start, it's very challenging for us.
Yes, but I mean, the starting thing is that's a thing. Maybe hopefully the UI5 team will find something to get you started on this. But you can start small, right? You don't need to. You can code the stuff that you do the way and just introduce new stuff on the fly. So that's
thank you.
So time-wise, I think we called it a day. Thank you for your questions. I'm going to pick that up soon. Mike, I forgot to mention that you were talking also at the UI5-like in May. Am I correct?
I did, yes.
Will you be there tomorrow for the recap event as well?
I will be there, but not as a speaker.
Okay, but then you're still around, so
yes.
people can approach you. That's great. Thank you.
Okay.